The metallic hum of the ship's engines gradually slowed as the sleek craft descended toward the towering structure on the horizon. The hotel was a massive thing, its steel framework stretching like a monument to excess and luxury, a beacon to travelers from across the galaxy. This was no ordinary building. It was the pinnacle of hospitality in the sector, a place where the rich and powerful came to escape their everyday lives. And for the first time, a human was about to step inside, albeit not on the best terms. Jonas Hartwell's hands gripped the console in front of him. His pulse thrummed, not from fear but from the strange, electrifying sense of being out of place. The sleek metal of the ship was all too familiar to him, yet this was unlike anything he had ever encountered. The holographic map of the planet ahead buzzed with data, reminding him that he was not just visiting a foreign planet, but a place where even his presence was likely a curiosity. Jonas wasn't a diplomat, a spacefaring merchant, or even a seasoned explorer. No, he was something far more mundane, a mechanic. The type of person you didn't notice unless something broke. Yet today he was about to step foot on an alien world, into a hotel that catered only to the wealthiest beings in the galaxy. This was a far cry from his usual greasy repair bays and oil-stained coveralls. But a mechanic, no matter how humble, had to take pride in his work. And his work had brought him here. The communication panel pinged. Approaching Hotel Noctis. All visitors are required to report to the reception area for registration upon arrival, a smooth, synthetic voice announced, its tone polite but somehow patronizing. Jonas let out a deep breath. Registration. Right. He wasn't here for leisure, and his ship certainly wasn't the kind of vehicle that graced the landing pads of this lavish establishment. He had only been contacted for one specific purpose: fix a malfunctioning system. Simple enough. Yet he couldn't shake the sense of dread creeping over him. He had seen enough to know that an interstellar hotel like Hotel Noctis didn't invite humans on a whim, especially not for something as trivial as a mechanical failure. The landing was smooth, almost too smooth, and Jonas's boots hit the tarmac with a faint thud. A small shuttle pod awaited him, its sleek design promising nothing less than efficiency. Jonas stuffed his tool kit into a small compartment at his side, adjusted his grease-stained shirt, and walked toward the entrance. As he approached, the automatic doors parted, revealing a towering reception desk manned by a single figure, an alien receptionist, her features alien to the point of being almost incomprehensible. She was tall, with glistening scales of emerald green that reflected the ambient light of the hotel. Her face was framed by ridged, bioluminescent tendrils, each pulsing softly as she moved. Her eyes were large and multifaceted, giving her the appearance of someone who saw everything but nothing at once. Jonas had never seen anything like her, an alien of such distinct form, unlike the humanoid types he had read about in his travel manuals. She was sitting behind a gleaming reception desk, typing rapidly on a console, her fingers deftly moving across a complex array of glowing keys. When she finally looked up, her eyes flicked over him with a barely noticeable flicker of disdain before her expression returned to its neutral poise. "Human," she said, the word coming out as a measured tone. "You are the mechanic, I presume?" Jonas straightened, feeling the weight of her gaze on him like a physical presence. "That's right. I'm here to take a look at your, systems." The receptionist's mandibles twitched in what might have been a smile, but it felt more like a sneer. "How quaint. I am sure your expertise is sufficient." She pressed a button on the desk, and a glowing display popped up in front of him, showing the details of his appointment. Jonas tried to suppress the irritation rising in his chest. He wasn't here to be judged or mocked, but it was clear that her alien eyes were already making assumptions about him, about humans in general. He had expected a bit of condescension, but this felt like something more. She wasn't just dismissive, she was belittling him as though his mere presence here was an affront to the very idea of the hotel's existence. "Right," he said, trying to sound nonchalant. "Where do I find the issue?" She flicked a tendril toward a door to the side, and a low hum emanated from the wall as the door slid open. "Follow the hall to the maintenance bay. I trust you know where to begin?" Jonas nodded, already turning toward the door. But before he could step through, the receptionist's voice stopped him. "Don't take too long," she said, her tone suddenly cold. "The hotel has a strict schedule to maintain. We do not tolerate delays from workers." The word hung in the air like a blade, sharp and dismissive. Workers. Jonas felt the sting of it more than he cared to admit, but he refused to let it show. After all, he was here to fix something, not to engage in a battle of egos. He would get the job done, collect his payment, and leave this absurd place behind. But as he walked down the hallway toward the maintenance bay, something gnawed at the back of his mind. He hadn't even been given a proper greeting, let alone the chance to explain why he was here in the first place. It wasn't lost on him that the receptionist had assumed he was just another low-level laborer, a mechanic here to fix some malfunction. But Jonas wasn't just any mechanic. He wasn't some faceless worker who could be dismissed. He was the owner of the very hotel they were standing in. As Jonas entered the maintenance bay, the sprawling high-tech control systems greeted him with a faint hum. This was a place built for elite professionals. He had seen similar setups before, ships and space stations, but nothing as expansive and pristine as this. The room was equipped with every conceivable tool, diagnostic station, and repair system available in the known universe. It was his playground, and soon the problem would be fixed. But somewhere in the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Why had they called him? He wasn't the type of person who frequented places like this. And why hadn't the receptionist shown any interest in learning more about who he was? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. But as the door slid open, Jonas didn't expect to see who stepped through. The receptionist. She wasn't here to supervise, to check on the progress of the work. No, her eyes were fixed squarely on him, and she was carrying an air of superiority that Jonas had seen too many times in his life, whether it was from pompous nobles, wealthy traders, or just plain arrogant people who thought their position could define them. She walked up to him, her posture rigid with authority, and stood there for a moment, eyes scanning the various systems he was working on. "Getting familiar with the equipment?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Jonas took a slow breath, trying to contain his growing irritation. "Just making sure I know what I'm dealing with. This system is unique?" She snorted, clearly not impressed. "I'm sure it is. But we don't have all day. The hotel schedule is tight, and we expect results, not distractions." Jonas opened his mouth to retort, but before he could say anything, the words died in his throat. What she didn't know was that the schedule she was so concerned about, it was his. The hotel, the systems, the very building they were standing in, it all belonged to him. But she wasn't done yet. "You know," she continued, "I wasn't sure why we hired a human mechanic in the first place. But then again, this hotel does pride itself on diversity." She gave him a pointed look, and he saw the subtle twitch of her mandibles that could have been mistaken for a smile. That was it. He couldn't take it anymore. "Look," he began, turning to face her, his voice rising, "I don't know who you think I am, but I'm not some underpaid grunt you can belittle. I'm not just some worker here to fix your problems. I own this place." For the first time, the receptionist faltered. Her expression flickered, just for a split second, before her gaze hardened. She said nothing, but the silence between them felt as heavy as the weight of the truth that Jonas had just laid bare. And in that moment, Jonas realized, things were about to get a whole lot more interesting. "You said." The room seemed to still for a moment, the soft hum of machinery and the cool air from the air filtration system fading into the background. Jonas stood tall, his fingers twitching at his side as if urging him to say something more, to press the point. But as the receptionist's expression shifted from contempt to an almost imperceptible flicker of confusion, he saw a new wave of uncertainty ripple through her. She had assumed he was nothing more than a laborer, a mechanic on some inconsequential errand. Now, standing before him, she realized that her assumption had been entirely wrong. A mistake. And not a small one. Jonas held his ground, his gaze unwavering as the receptionist processed the weight of his words. The silence stretched, thick with tension. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her tendrils twitched, the bioluminescence flickering slightly, a sign that her emotions were fluctuating in a way that Jonas could sense even if she wasn't directly saying anything. You're what?" she finally asked, the disbelief in her voice thick and unmistakable. Her eyes, multifaceted and calculating, scanned him again, this time with something that wasn't disdain. It was curiosity. But there was no hiding the air of disbelief in her voice. "I'm the owner," Jonas repeated, his voice steady but laced with a quiet challenge. "Hotel Noctis, the systems, the whole shebang. I'm the one who signed the contracts, the one who made it all happen." Her eyes widened for a moment, and then she looked around the bay, as if expecting the walls to come crashing down in some revelation. Her gaze flicked back to Jonas, and she raised a delicate brow, a feature that was both alien and remarkably human at the same time. "But that's impossible," she whispered, half to herself. Her eyes narrowed, trying to find some discrepancy, some crack in his story. But there was none. Jonas wasn't the kind of person who relied on bluster or fabricated stories. He wasn't here to play games, he was here because something needed fixing. Something that had been bothering him for days. Look, he said, running a hand through his hair, I didn't come here for a power struggle. I came here to fix a problem. The systems have been malfunctioning for a while and you called me in for it. Simple as that. She tilted her head slightly as if processing what he'd said, but then the disbelief turned to something else, something closer to frustration. She straightened up, lifting herself even taller than before, her long tendrils curling around the edges of the reception desk like a warning. Even if you are the owner, she said, her voice carrying a dangerous edge, it doesn't change anything. You're still a human. A mechanic at that. Her eyes narrowed as she took a step closer, not in a threatening manner, but with the quiet, confident assurance of someone who felt completely in control. Your kind doesn't belong here, Hartwell. Jonas clenched his fists at his sides. He knew where this was going. She was still operating under the assumption that because he was human, and a mechanic at that, he was nothing more than a servant, a cog in the massive machine of Hotel Noctis. She was here to put him in his place, to remind him that humans didn't belong in the opulent, elite world of interstellar hospitality. It was a game as old as time. But Jonas wasn't going to let her have the satisfaction. He let out a long breath and straightened, standing eye to eye with the receptionist. His tone was sharp, cutting through the tension like a blade. Let me make something clear, he said, his voice now calm but forceful. I'm not just here because I need the money. I'm here because I own this hotel. The systems, the staff, everything. This place you're so proud of? My name's on every contract, every blueprint. And every decision made here? He paused, letting that weight sink in. I made it. The receptionist recoiled slightly, her large, multifaceted eyes blinking rapidly as if trying to process what he was saying. She blinked again, her tendrils flickering with a mix of confusion and annoyance. This cannot be, she stammered as if the idea itself was a physical assault. You're lying. This is not your place. No human could own something like this. Jonas smiled, the bitter edge of the situation cutting through his facade. That's the funny thing about it. You never asked me who I was when I walked in here, did you? You assumed. You all assumed. He took a slow, deliberate step toward her, closing the space between them. You're looking at me, thinking human mechanic, but what you don't realize is that I've been a part of this hotel since the very beginning. I built it from the ground up, with my hands and my mind. And now you? He stopped himself just short of raising his voice, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. But something inside him snapped, and he took another step forward, his body pressing against the tension in the air. Now you're just an employee. Just like everyone else here. The receptionist stood motionless, her once proud stance faltering slightly under the weight of Jonas's words. Her tendrils quivered with tension, the bioluminescent glow of her scales dimming in response to the sudden shift in atmosphere. There was no longer any smug superiority in her expression, only the stunned silence of someone who had miscalculated, someone who had made a serious mistake. She opened her mouth again as if to speak, but then faltered, her words failing her. I didn't know. Jonas took a step back, his anger receding but not forgotten. Clearly. But now you do. Now we can get back to business. You told me there was a system issue. I'm here to fix it. So, let's not waste any more time with assumptions, shall we? The receptionist stared at him for another long moment, her confusion palpable. Then, slowly she nodded, almost begrudgingly as if admitting defeat to someone she had once seen as beneath her. You're right, she said finally, the words hanging in the air like the acknowledgement of an unspoken truth. I was wrong. Jonas exhaled, forcing the tension from his shoulders. Good. Now let's get to work. I have a job to do. With a final flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, the receptionist turned and gestured toward the far side of the room, where a console was displaying the erratic readings of the malfunctioning system. As Jonas moved toward it, he couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction. The playing field had shifted. But the most significant change had yet to come. The real battle wouldn't be about fixing the system. It would be about proving to the universe that humans, no matter their place in the cosmos, were more than capable of rising above expectations. And Jonas Hartwell had just begun to show the galaxy what a human could truly do. You said. Jonas felt the cold air of the maintenance bay wrap around him as he approached the glowing diagnostic panel. The system's readings blinked erratically, casting sharp shadows on the polished walls. It was a high-tech, intricate piece of machinery, far more complex than any of the systems he'd ever worked on before, but he knew this type of equipment. He had built it. He had designed it. The receptionist watched him from a distance, her towering figure framed by the soft glow of the room's ambient lighting. For the first time since he arrived, her posture had shifted. No longer was she standing in judgment, arms crossed with an air of superiority. She was waiting, hesitant, perhaps even a little embarrassed. Jonas felt a flicker of something akin to satisfaction, though he quickly suppressed it. He was here to fix things, not to relish in petty victories. Jonas placed his hands on the console, his fingers skimming over the smooth surface of the control pad as the diagnostic programs ran. It was clear that the systems had been tampered with. Some of the input sensors were feeding false data, and the power grid was unstable. It wasn't a minor issue. It could cause catastrophic failures in the hotel's core systems if left unchecked. The receptionist hadn't exaggerated when she said the hotel's schedule was tight. If this wasn't repaired soon, it could trigger a chain reaction that would bring down the entire establishment, leaving thousands stranded in luxury and chaos. He let out a slow breath. He had done far worse. This would be nothing he couldn't fix. The sound of her approaching footsteps broke the silence. "I still don't understand," the receptionist said, her voice tentative, almost as if she was trying to find the right words. "How is it that you, a human, could possibly have the knowledge to create something like this? The technology here, it's beyond what we could have imagined." Jonas paused, his fingers hovering over a series of glowing touch points as he glanced over at her. The skepticism was gone, replaced by genuine curiosity. It wasn't as if she was looking down on him anymore, but rather questioning the very framework of her reality. This hotel, this gleaming monument to alien luxury and precision, was built by a human. A species so often dismissed, so often seen as inferior in this corner of the galaxy. Her words hit Jonas in ways he hadn't expected. There was no malice now, just a quiet vulnerability, and perhaps even an awakening. "You think humans are just grunt labor, don't you?" Jonas asked, voice soft but firm. "You think we're just here to fix things and move on, to never be a part of something grand, something monumental?" The receptionist's expression flickered. She didn't answer immediately, as though still grappling with the enormity of what he was saying. Her tendrils twitched, the lights on them dimming as if she were considering something deeply personal. For a moment she seemed almost fragile. "I didn't mean to," she started, but Jonas raised a hand, cutting her off. "Don't apologize," he said, turning back to the diagnostic console. "You didn't know. But now you do. And that's enough." She stayed silent as he worked, her presence still lingering in the air like a heavy fog. It wasn't long before Jonas had tracked down the issue. It wasn't a simple malfunction. No, this was a deliberate sabotage, a subtle but intentional disruption of the power flow that had gone undetected for days. It had been masked by false readings in the system to cover up the traces, but Jonas had seen the pattern. He could read the subtle inconsistencies in the data, the marks of an outside force attempting to manipulate the hotel systems. "That's odd," Jonas muttered to himself. "This is beyond just malfunctioning systems. Someone's been intentionally tampering with the hotel's core." The receptionist's head tilted slightly, her glowing eyes now focused intently on the screen. "You think it's sabotage?" Her voice was low, almost uncertain, as if she didn't quite understand the gravity of what he was saying. Jonas nodded, his brow furrowing as he scanned through the encrypted data. "It's not just sabotage, it's something more. Someone knew exactly how to hide their tracks, how to make this look like a technical glitch. But the patterns don't lie." He quickly accessed another layer of the system, diving deeper into the core files. The more he searched, the more it became apparent that this wasn't just a random act of sabotage. It was targeted. The system had been engineered to cause as much disruption as possible, and if Jonas hadn't been able to find it, the hotel would have suffered a major system-wide failure in the coming days. "What's worse," Jonas continued, almost speaking to himself, "is that this isn't just a random act of rebellion or a corporate competitor trying to bring the hotel down. Whoever did this was planning on making the whole thing look like a malfunction. They wanted this to go unnoticed. They wanted everyone to believe it was just a mistake." The receptionist's expression shifted, her eyes flashing with a new kind of intensity. "Who would want to destroy something so monumental?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. "The hotel is the pride of the sector. Whoever would do this is either incredibly bold, or very, very dangerous." Jonas didn't answer right away. He was already piecing things together. Whoever was behind this sabotage had likely planned it for weeks, perhaps even months, biding their time. The intricacies of the hotel systems, designed for luxury and precision, were used against them. But the real question remained, why? What was the motive? And why target Hotel Noctis? He leaned back in his chair, taking a moment to rub his eyes. There was a gnawing feeling in the pit of his stomach, an unease that he couldn't quite shake. This was no random act of malice. Someone with knowledge of the hotel's operations, someone who had access to its highest levels of security, was behind this. The thought sent a chill down his spine. Whoever is behind this, Jonas said, his voice quieter now, they're a lot closer to us than we think. The receptionist's eyes widened. She stepped closer, clearly unsettled by his words. What do you mean? Someone in the hotel? Jonas didn't answer immediately. He pulled up another window on the console, revealing a complex series of user logs. The logs showed that only a handful of people had access to the most secure parts of the hotel's infrastructure, one of them being the head of operations. Jonas didn't need to see the name to know who it was. He'd worked with them long enough to understand how things ran here. And that's when the realization hit him like a lightning bolt. Damn it, Jonas muttered, slamming a fist onto the console. It's Tarek? The receptionist blinked, her mandibles twitching in surprise. Tarek? The head of operations? She paused, then took a small step back, her demeanor changing again. But he's one of our most trusted employees. I don't understand. Jonas shook his head, the pieces clicking into place. Tarek has been running a secret agenda from the inside. He's the one who sabotaged the system. And he's been using his position to cover his tracks. I don't know what his endgame is yet, but this is no accident. He wants to take this place down from the inside. The weight of his words settled between them, thick and suffocating. The receptionist, for all her alien pride and superiority, seemed to shrink in the face of this revelation. Her eyes widened. A sea of vulnerability. She had trusted Tarek. Everyone had. I had no idea, she whispered. Jonas stood up, now fully focused on the task ahead. That's because he's good at hiding his true intentions. But now that we know what's going on, we can stop him. The receptionist nodded, her voice trembling as she spoke. What do we do now? Jonas glanced at the malfunctioning systems once more, his mind racing as he put together a plan. First, we finish fixing the immediate issues. Then we bring this to the higher-ups. I'm going to need your help if we're going to stop Tarek before he does more damage. The weight of what lay ahead was undeniable, but for the first time since his arrival, Jonas felt a sense of purpose and clarity. He was no longer just a mechanic in a foreign hotel. He was the owner of this place. His responsibility was to protect it, to ensure its survival. And Jonas Hartwell was going to make sure no one, not even the most trusted employee, would tear it down. The room was eerily silent as Jonas and the receptionist stood in front of the diagnostic console, the gravity of the situation pressing heavily on their shoulders. It had all led to this moment, revealing the sabotage, uncovering the betrayal, and now dealing with the fallout. Jonas's hands rested on the console, eyes locked on the schematics of the hotel's system. The time for hesitation had passed. Tarek, the man behind the sabotage, had to be stopped. But the task ahead of them was immense and there was no turning back. The receptionist's eyes were filled with doubt and fear now, her glowing tendrils twitching erratically, reflecting her anxiety. She had once looked down on Jonas, dismissed him as a simple human mechanic, but now she was standing beside him, relying on his expertise and leadership. Her world had been turned upside down, but there was still a chance to save everything she had worked for. We need to move fast, Jonas said, his voice steady despite the tension that threatened to unnerve him. The sabotage has already disrupted the hotel's internal systems. If Tarek has planned this carefully, he'll have backdoors in place, allowing him to access and control everything. We need to cut him off before he can cause any more damage. The receptionist nodded, her bioluminescence dimming slightly as she moved to a console across the room. Her fingers flew across the interface, trying to manually override the access protocols Tarek had placed. But Jonas could feel the resistance in the system. It was as if Tarek had anticipated their every move. They were up against an opponent who was not just intelligent but ruthlessly strategic. He's already on his way to the central core, the receptionist said, her voice strained. He'll have full control of the hotel's primary functions in less than 15 minutes if we don't stop him. Jonas clenched his fists. He didn't need to hear the details. He knew what was at stake. He wasn't just protecting a building. He was protecting the lives of hundreds if not thousands of guests and staff, not to mention his own reputation. Failure was not an option. We're going to cut the power grid, Jonas said, his voice firm. It's the only way to stop him from getting to the central core. But we'll have to do it manually. The failsafe needs to be triggered from the main generator room. The receptionist looked at him, a mix of disbelief and fear in her eyes. You want us to cut the entire power supply to the hotel? Are you crazy? That would lock us in with Tarek, and it'll cause panic in the entire sector. I'm not giving him the chance to destabilize everything, Jonas replied, his voice low but determined. The power needs to be cut now or we risk losing everything. Besides, he's expecting us to make a move in the central core. He won't be prepared for us cutting off the power at the source. Without waiting for her response, Jonas turned and began moving swiftly toward the maintenance access. He could already hear the hum of the hotel's central systems in the distance, the steady pulse of machinery that kept everything running smoothly. As he walked, he couldn't help but think of the many times he had walked through these halls, unaware of the treachery that lurked behind the gleaming exterior of Hotel Noctis. Now, every hallway, every corner, felt charged with the impending confrontation. The receptionist followed him, her steps quick but hesitant. She had been trained to maintain luxury, not to stop a saboteur from bringing down the entire operation. But now she was forced to act, to put her faith in a human who had proven himself capable, even when all odds were against him. They reached the generator room. The heavy door hissed open with a soft pneumatic groan, and inside, the low hum of the massive power grids was deafening. This was the heart of the hotel, where everything from the lighting to the gravity stabilizers, the communications and the life support systems, all came to life. It was both a marvel of engineering and a critical vulnerability. Jonas stepped forward, tapping in a series of codes to access the system's primary override. His fingers flew across the interface, eyes scanning the data as he quickly isolated the power controls. In the back of his mind, he could feel the ticking of the clock, the seconds slipping away as Tarek drew closer. Once I trigger this, there's no going back, Jonas warned the receptionist. Everything shuts down. The hotel will go dark. The systems will reset. We'll lose communications and the central core will be locked down for a while. If we're wrong, if we don't make it out before that happens, we're trapped. She nodded, her expression grave but resolute. We'll get out, she said firmly, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her unease. Jonas hesitated for just a second, feeling the weight of the decision on his shoulders. He could already imagine the chaos that would follow. Guests panicking, employees scrambling to keep control, the hotel staff overwhelmed as systems flickered and died. But he knew it had to be done. There was no other way. He hit the button. A low hum filled the room, then the lights flickered as the entire hotel's power grid began to shut down. The central core and all its vast systems were now inaccessible to Tarek. For a moment, everything seemed still, silent. Then the lights in the room went out completely, and the soft glow of emergency lights flickered on, casting long shadows across the walls. Now we move, Jonas said, already turning on his heel, heading for the nearest access hatch that would lead them out of the generator room. His heart pounded and the adrenaline surged through his veins. He could feel the weight of the hotel's security systems now slipping out of reach, knowing that everything depended on them escaping without being caught. The receptionist followed closely, her footsteps echoing in the dark hallway. Jonas didn't need to look back to know she was just as determined as he was. Together, they made their way through the maintenance corridors, navigating the labyrinth of the hotel's inner workings. Time was running out, and with every passing moment, the risk of Tarek discovering their actions grew. As they neared the exit, the sound of footsteps echoed through the corridors. Tarek was close. Jonas exchanged a quick glance with the receptionist, who nodded, ready to face whatever came next. They had no choice now. There was no retreat. Only forward. The doors to the central corridor swung open, and they stepped into the wide, empty expanse of the hotel's lower levels. But just as Jonas thought they might be safe, a figure emerged from the shadows. Tarek, standing in the doorway, his eyes gleaming with cold calculation. "You think you can stop me?" Tarek sneered, his voice dripping with malice. "You have no idea what you've just done." Jonas stood tall, a calm fury in his eyes. "I know exactly what I've done," he said. "And it's over." With that, Jonas moved first, taking a step forward. The receptionist, her body stiff with readiness, followed suit. It wasn't just a battle to save the hotel anymore. It was a fight for survival.